good. Fantastic. So, morning everyone. Glad to see a few people joining already. Just wait a couple more minutes before everyone joining. So welcome to the ABS first virtual Australian Day tasting week, or Australia Day set of seminars. Of course, unfortunately, we would be out in force at the Australia Day tasting in London somewhere, just chatting to the boys and saying how we'd probably be flying to Scotland right about now for the Scotland leg of the tasting, or perhaps not, with the snow closing Edinburgh Airport. Who knows? But at least we get to all sit in the cozy warmth of our own living rooms, offices, kitchens, and in Troy and Ben's case, their winery. So welcome everyone, and guys, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having us, man.
So let's kick things off. So both of you are incredibly close to Melbourne, of course. Rory, in fact, the winery is pretty much right in the centre of town. Melbourne has become quite the hotspot for food exploration, and there's a fantastic subculture of wine and drink and fresh produce. Do you think that's inspired the way in which you make your wines? Perhaps, Rory, come to you first, being as you're closer to the CBD than the boys.
Yeah, thanks, Elliot. Totally. Yeah, absolutely it has. I think most of my wine, well, certainly before COVID and the lockdowns, most of my wine was sold in restaurants. So the way that wines pair with food is part of our DNA. It's about how we make our wines. And I don't think that's going to change, because, engaging with food and fresh produce and restaurateurs and all of those other creative people, you get so much energy from that. So yeah, it's a big part of what we do.
Nice. And Lazzy, obviously you also have a bit of a cellar door vibe going on now. How's that affected people's interest in your wine and food styles?
It's been great, because we've actually been able to interact with people. You know what I mean? So with the cellar door, we've been able to talk one-on-one, and pre-COVID, when we can all travel, there's going to be a lot of that theme, obviously. But we've got a heap of people from the UK being able to actually come out, because we're only an hour out of Melbourne, so come out for a day trip, go to a lot of the restaurants and stuff like that, and come to our winery in cellar door, and we can actually have a chat. And then it's also been really fantastic, because we've been able to, direct people when they get back home, to be able to, to you guys and retailers all over the UK to be able to do it. But I guess having that on our doorstep has been absolutely amazing for us to be able to, wine styles and looking at things. We don't have to deal with, we do all our own distribution. So we talk to the restaurants, we talk to the bars, we're able to actually sort of see what the vibe is and what's going on and what's of interest. You know what I mean? Like, we made an orange Verdelho a couple of years ago that we thought, what the hell are we going to do with Verdelho from the Yarra Valley? And it pretty much went 2 pallets through the cellar door like that. And then this year we're turning around going, we'll have as much fruit as you can give us. And if you told us that when we made it, we were just like, we got no idea what we're going to do with it.
Yeah. And just briefly, Ella, back to Melbourne and the food scene, because the Yarra and where Rory's located as well, which is kind of, his vineyards are supposed to the north and northwest of Melbourne, and we're to the east, so to speak. There is a pretty big, like, symbiotic relationship between the restaurants,
what's in season,
and what we do. And so Melbourne's kind of started to, it is very open-minded in the wines they try, but they are also very aware of local and shop local and buy local. So they're quite parochial at the same time. And we get a lot of soms, out here or up in the vineyard helping us pick, or, just chatting and feeding off each other. So yeah, we're certainly not set in our ways, and we do cross-pollinate, for one of the better words.
So would you say that it really helps having that sort of immediate feedback loop? So you're stuck in Melbourne. There's lots of restaurants feedback. Some say, look, chaps, I think next season this is going to be in fashion. The food is going down this direction. What can we do to put the wine in the same direction as the food? So Roy, is there a wine you've made that's been with the trends of food progression in mind?
Yeah, I'd say so. Look, certainly when we started making our Marsan Roussan Viognier back in like around 2010, 2011, it's quite some time ago now, but there was kind of a lack of white wines on the market that were super textural and low acid. There's lots of stuff that was quite, acid driven and fine and detailed, but stuff that that had that super textural mouthfeel, there just wasn't much about. And that was kind of when skin contact stuff started coming in a bit more in Australia. So us making that wine was certainly in direct response to restaurants saying, hey, we need more kind of food-friendly whites.
And Troy, Ben, any sort of direct food trend that you've steered your winemaking towards?
We've got a lot of good mates who are pretty good chefs, what we'd consider pretty good chefs in the style of food that we like eating. So like lots of coal cooking and reuse of like every single piece of the vegetable, for example, or the meat or whatever. And so, kind of the wines that we like drinking paired with those styles of cooking is the way that we talk. And we've certainly moved. I think when I first started making wine in the Yarra, we used to emulate what they used to do in Bordeaux for the Bordeaux varietals and Burgundy for the Pinot varietals and Chardonnays. And I think over the last kind of 20 years, we've diverged significantly and kind of developed our own styles, particularly with the Yarra, but Rory certainly has done the same thing. So, and that's because of this chat and friendship, that we have and we're not kind of, we're never set in our ways and the way we have to make the wine, and every year it's changing more and more and becoming their own kind of personalities and reflecting where they're from, I suppose, as well. So we develop it together and it's good. And we're going for fresher styles, less oak, so we can actually get a wine out within kind of 6 to 8 months now to hit the summer kind of frenzy and we get direct feedback and so it works well.
Perfect. Well, talking of fresher styles, I think the first wine we're going to taste together, and unfortunately my Chardonnay was broken in courier, so it arrived yesterday in pieces. So, Roy, I know you've got the Payten and Jones Valley Vigneron Chardonnay as well, and of course, Ben, Troy, you have the Chardonnay as well. So, talk us through a little bit about perhaps the Valley Vigneron series in general, and then specifically the Chardonnay and what kind of style you're looking to achieve here.
Yeah, I think Rory kind of touched on a little bit before with his Marsan Roussan call, where our VV series is much more kind of a weeknight, what we call a weeknight wine.
Fresh, approachable, you just want to get stuck into it.
Pluggable.
Over delivering for the price point, if you know what I mean. So you get to serious, it's fun and approachable, but it's also scrape off the layers. It is quite serious when you actually look at it, but we don't want to think of it like that. We want to think of it just to enjoy it, just have a drink.
If you want to put it in front of a somm, you can start getting technical and from the vineyard all the way through to the making, to the taste. But at the same time, it appeals to like a lot of people. Like it's in that fresh style. It's got low acidity because we put it through 100% Malo, but we kind of avoid that butterscotchy kind of character. We're still getting kind of a freshness.
And all those people that say, I hate Chardonnay, it always ends up being pretty good because they go, oh shit, this is all right.
Yeah, well, this is one of my favorite wines. It's actually a wine that I have regularly actually in my wine rack at home. So although I don't have it with me, it's something I can picture quite particularly. And actually for me, it's a wine that you take a sip and you think, oh, that's really interesting. And then quickly the glass is empty and you think, oh God, where did that go? I've got to open another bottle now. Roy, it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts tasting it from your perspective, because it's not a style of wine perhaps that you make either, is it? It's something a little bit, and of course the being northeast Victoria versus northwest. Well, interesting to hear your feedback. Don't be too rude. The boys are here.
Yeah. Well, look,
not on the train within his time. He can be as unpolite as he wants.
Yeah, he's sitting in the window seat on the way to Edinburgh.
I won't give you the 11 p.m. just finished a day's tasting, been out to have 4 pints, and then a late dinner kind of honesty. But I'll give you. I had it the other day. Actually, in all honesty, I don't have it with me tonight because we drank it the other night.
Perfect.
It did disappear very quickly. We had it with some family came over. Thankfully, we're actually able to have people in our homes in Australia. Well, certainly in Melbourne at the moment, which is a blessing. And my sister-in-law and I and my wife just demolished it in about 20 minutes. I like the fact that it appears to me to be early picked and then barrel fermented and then full malo. So you get the freshness from the early picking, but you get the texture from the malo component. And that if you pick it a bit earlier, then I'm just guessing here, but if you pick it a bit earlier, then you avoid getting that kind of fatness and heaviness, which is not actually dissimilar from how we make our Marsanne, Roussanne, Viognier. Like totally different varieties, but I'd imagine they're made in a reasonably similar way, full malo and reasonably early picked. But I love the fact that it's got that barrel complexity and texture, but it's still in a kind of lightweight package. It's yum.
The thing I love about Australian Chardonnay over the last 40 years is it's certainly been that huge pendulum swing. When it was originally popular in the 90s, early 2000s, of course, we had the sort of advent of sales into supermarkets in the UK. We're talking about big, buttery, full, loads of oak, loads of mallow, and very ripe fruit. And I think perhaps there was a trend against that went completely the other way, which was zero mallow, zero oak, incredibly lean, incredibly austere. And I think the pendulum, especially with your wine, is sort of perfectly sort of fitted back into the middle, where there's a conscious use of mallow and a very conscious use of balanced oak influence to pair with that fruit, but not overpowering in any way. Just perfect harmony.
Did I get it right?
Yeah, not bad. You should start winemaking as a career, Rory.
I've been trying to start for 20 years.
So I saw you, Troy Behn. You've been. I've been picturing your oyster guy, who obviously comes to the cellar door. And I'm sort of sitting here in the snow, in the grey and wet, and just thinking of drinking your Valley Vigneron Chardonnay with that. It seems like an absolute legend. Talk us through about that oyster guy and a bit of Chardonnay. It seems like the perfect match made in heaven, to be honest.
It is. Yeah.
He's a classic. You could do it, no joke, without a word of a lie. You can do an hour YouTube on this fella. He's owned restaurants. He flies his own plane from Bermagui with his oysters down to Melbourne, drives them out to us. He's got the worst jingles in the world that are actually awesome. Like when you find them, they're so like, this guy's from the 80s and early 90s, and this is just terrible, but it is so good. He sings and dances in his restaurant. And then he's now reached this point where he's slinging oysters. He's got a couple of oyster vans up in Bermagui and up in, I think, Eden, one of them. And then he comes down here once the borders are open and he's allowed to come out and just slings oysters and fresh crays. It's hilarious. And then all the locals come down. He does them at $18 a dozen, fully shucked, ready to go. It's really just paper plates and, like you said, just smashing Chardonnay and a little bit of sherry and prosecco, cava and stuff like that. And it's just fun. You know what I mean? His name's Mike. They call him Banjo because he's a banjo player. And he just when we first met him, we said, have you got a brand? Have you got something we can actually sell? And he just looked up into the left and went, Banjo's Oysters. And then that was his brand from then on. It was awesome. We had to organize our designer to do his logo so we could use it on socials and everything. Like getting to hear that, it's awesome.
But that's exactly the kind of culture that I'm talking about in Melbourne. It's to have this guy who's flying down, picking his own oysters, flying back to the cellar door, smashing Chardonnay and fresh oysters. I mean, that's really the dream, isn't it? Chucks, can you just show the bottle of your Chardonnay? Because a couple of people are asking, what is the wine? There we go. I would show it. But so Valley Vignon Chardonnay from Payten and Jones, Troy and Ben, which is I always say Troy and Ben, which is Jones and Payten, but it's maybe should be said Ben and Troy. So moving on to sort of our next topic. Through 2020, lots of independent retailers have been popping up in the UK, and I know talking about Anne's cruelty of talking about summer and oysters when we're stuck here in the grey miserable, but we can but dream, and. So lots of independent retailers popping up in the UK recently, and a lot of them seem to have a focus on natural or minimal intervention wine, because it's such a great marketing tool. But matching that with the actual practice of minimal intervention, would you say that I think that phenomenon has almost been and passed in Melbourne, or is it still very much still a natural minimal intervention? That's all that anyone's looking for at the moment.
The irony of that is, I'm sorry, but the irony of that is as well as we were doing it out of instinct 10 to 12 years ago, and it's now really funny because it's just come on point, and I reckon Rory's exactly the same. It's just come on point now, and everyone now it's the buzzword and everything's doing it. But even when you say come and pass, it'll still be the way we want to bank our wines and want to do it. It's been something that it works, and at the end of the day, we just want to be able to make delicious booze, and that's how we've been able to do it. Yeah, like I think that's the key to it. It's just we're not trying to find a trend or do something that was years ago it was not cool. We never entered a competition or we never had a show because I just look at it and go, yeah, cloudy, reductive, so we just fuck it, we're not going to do it anymore. And now all of a sudden everyone's on point for that and wants that trend, from big retailers down to independents and stuff as well. So in Melbourne anyway.
Yeah, and Roy, how about you? Did you set out to think, when I'm making wine, I'm going to make it to the market, or was that the way you wanted to make wine all along?
I think like very early on, when I first started making wine, I knew that I needed to have a business that actually, could survive. So you gotta be mindful of what the market is doing, because you got to sell it to somebody. But I think once I actually got into making this stuff, I think the key for me was just to kind of respect the fruit. And so like you get the best grapes you can, and chucking a whole lot of extra manipulation and processes and heaps of oak and stuff like that at it just didn't seem right. And the best results I always got were when I did less. So it just kind of evolved, for want of a better word, naturally. And it's just the way I do it. It's I'm not dogmatic about being like a natural winemaker, because if that even has a definition. But I use sulfur. If something absolutely has to be done to make the wine better, I'll do it. But most of the time, it's just a case of less being more, being the general philosophy.
Yeah, and I think it's often calling and branding a wine as natural often is quite divisive, because it kind of, anyone who is not therefore using that term can tend to be seen as unnatural. So whilst, as you say, you've been making wines with an instinctive tendency to less intervention, I think it's a fantastic and interesting point to say that you don't brand yourselves as natural winemakers. Well, natural winemakers, as in I'm sure you're natural born winemakers, but perhaps wouldn't brand yourselves as natural winemakers for the sake of being natural winemakers.
No, there's plenty of people that do, but and I would say that the generation below us might tend more towards calling themselves that, if I want to make some pretty sweeping statements. But certainly people older than us are have tended to buck against the idea of natural wines, and people younger than us have probably embraced it more. I'd say people at the stage of our careers, which is, like 15 odd years in, we're probably the kind of tipping point. I don't know if you guys would agree with that, but like we could have swung either way as winemakers at the time that we started, but we didn't really have the labels back then, and we just kind of went with instinct.
Yeah, without it being sort of hipster, doing it before it was cool. It's not really that sort of thing, is it? It's just the fact that it was essentially the right thing to do. Ben, and Sarah's question here, I think we're going to come to you on this one, being that it runs in the family. How important is the vineyard selection in this minimal intervention process? Starting from, let's say, the grassroots up, how important would you say that is?
Well, if you don't have good fruit, you can't make good wine. I mean, everyone knows that. I suppose the hardest part about heading down a more low intervention, kind of low impact farming is that if you make a mistake, particularly in our climate, you can lose pretty much the vintage, the crop. So it takes a lot more work and a lot more knowledge base to get it right. I suppose in the Yarra, I don't know about Rory's side of things, but we're moving more towards, I suppose, what we term biological farming as opposed to organics or biodynamics. We're steering, a lot of the science now is kind of steering us away from dogmatic organic practices like heavy copper or even any copper use, because kind of copper builds up in the soil and doesn't go away, and it kills all the microbes and fungi. We know that now. We didn't know that in 1920. And then biodynamics is much more, there's not a lot of science behind the teas and the bearing of the cow horns and all that stuff. But there are now teas out there, essentially brews of beneficial bacteria that you can put on the vineyard that do the same kind of use as a biodynamic kind of philosophy, but it's actually backed by science. So we're moving more towards that. There's a lot more awareness of soil health, of less water usage. So and soil health has everything to do with that, and also like beneficial kind of predatory insects and animals in the vineyard, which can actually, well, you shouldn't have to ever use an insecticide in the vineyard if you encourage these beneficial insects and predatory mites. And so there's lots of ways now that you can do the right thing, and it's about doing the right thing more so than and being sustainable more than any dogmatic kind of approach to I'm doing organics because it's organics. I'm doing it's about doing the right thing.
Yeah, doing the right thing rather than doing the prescribed thing that everyone seems to be what should be prescribed. So, talking about the generation before, how's Pete, your father Ben? Is he how's he getting him on board with soil health and disease resistant? I think is building soil health for natural disease resistance in plants. How's he getting on board with that? Being his sort of history in viticulture in the Yarra.
Well, I suppose like he started out. His first gig was at Botabalar up in Mudgee, which is like Australia's first organic vineyard. So he had a lot of, and he was a pretty dyed-in-the-wool hippie.
So he really was doing it before it was cool.
Yeah. So and then he had to look after commercial vineyards. So he had to move to that side of things. So he's always wanted that low input stuff. And I suppose now that we've had the vineyard now for 10 years, so he's been able to implement all the ideas that he's had. Because if we look, like, we lost a whole year of Chardonnay because it just didn't work and everything went against us. But it is what it is. He's not going to lose a job over it or whatever.
I was going to say my favourite Pete quote is we did something with another grower, and we bought some fruit off this guy, and the other producer. It worked perfectly. Everything went really well, and we're making it exactly the same winery. our Pinot just didn't work. And I just said to Peter, I said, what do you reckon? What's the going? He goes, I don't know. I've got no idea. And I said, oh, okay, that's right. And he goes, Troy, I've only done this 40 times.
It's true.
And I went,
You get one shot once a year.
yeah, right. You've only done this 40 times. And that really, for me, put it in perspective about it's still learning and still going. Even it's been his entire career and it's been his entire thing. You still get times when you just don't know what happens.
And every year's different weather-wise.
Exactly.
It's interesting. Yeah, sorry, carry on, Ben. Yeah.
I was just going to say there's another comment about like leading in terms of the future. It's interesting that there's an overarching kind of awareness within the whole Australian wine industry to move to more sustainable practices. So it's certainly on everyone's radar. We have limited, one of our most precious resources is water. So there's a lot of awareness of that. There's a lot of awareness on energy inputs and carbon kind of inputs into the vineyards and how we manage that. There is an argument that we actually capture and store a lot of carbon with the vines growing, and the prunings just go back onto the soil. But there's certainly everybody is aware of it, and everybody is trying to do the right thing, for the future.
And it's funny, I was just saying with that iterative process, as a winemaker or a viticulturist, you only get 40 or 50 iterations before you retire. And I've done a lot of virtual wine tastings for digital security companies who are programmers who require hundreds of thousands of iterations a day to sort out their programming. And when you say, well, we only get to do 40 of these to make the perfect product, it's completely mind-blowing to them to say, if you could only have 40 iterations to make your digital product or your security, it's impossible. And so therefore everyone is on this impossible task, making wine. So Sarah, phrase regenerative farming is certainly that sort of buzz phrase, I think, chaps. So you heard that sort of increasing that soil health to help regenerate the natural disease resistance within vines.
I suppose if that's what it is referring to. I haven't really heard the phrase over here. I mean, everybody is just kind of going down that biological farming route, where you are constantly improving soil health, constantly improving the predatory insects and predatory animals that are in the vineyards, and it's about, not only are you minimizing your inputs in terms of what you're doing, it's also kind of cost effective as well at the same time. So, and you feel good, you're doing the right thing.
Rory, do you have anything
to? Yeah, certainly. Trying to impact soil structure. Improving soil health to improve soil structure, because if you can improve the structure of the soil, get more organic matter into the soil, then it's likely going to hold more water anyway, which is one of the biggest problems we face. So, when you attack it from one angle, it ends up being beneficial from other angles too. So, just trying to do the right thing by the soil will help you. It's not just about feeling good. It's about doing the right thing, but also making better wine and making it easier to make better wine.
Sure. Yeah, I guess that the healthier fruit material you're working with, and therefore the healthier vines, and therefore the healthier soil, it all stems back to make the fewer interventions one might have to make in the winemaking process if the fruit material and because of the soil health, the fruit material is better, and therefore you have to make fewer interventions. Should we move on to your first wine, Rory? And I think we'll we'll move on to. So this is the Story Wines Grampians Grenache. Fantastic, and we can let the boys reciprocate on their analysis of where we're going here, and then we'll come to Rory. Bit. You can give us a bit of the raison d'être behind this wine as well.
Yeah, sure. So, talking about where things are going in the future, I think part of farming more sustainably is planting stuff that is suited to the place that it's grown. And with the way the climate has moved in the last 15 years or so, there are some varieties that are just no longer suited to where they were planted. And certainly there's areas in our region in the Grampians that a bit like in the valley floor of the Yarra Valley that might be a bit too warm for some of the varieties that were planted there. And so we had the idea that we'd start planting Grenache in some of the warmer sites in the Grampians to plant something that would ripen later, that didn't require as much water, and also had nice kind of robust leaves and robust skins that would be less disease susceptible to disease. So yeah, plus I just love Grenache. So I thought it was about time that our region had some. So we got one of our growers to plant it for us back in 2014, and this 17 is first harvest from those vines. So they're only 3-year-old vines at that stage, but and 17 was a cold year by recent standards. But yeah, we figured that we could get Grenache right now, and we can. 20 years ago, we probably wouldn't have, but now we can. And so the idea was to make, something that was more suited to the place that it was growing in, and also a style of Grenache that was juicy and forward and had acidity to it and wasn't massive and kind of inky and stewy. So yeah, we almost call it our Grampians Pinot.
Yeah, no, it's boys. Troy, Ben, I love you to do to return the favour to Rory and give a bit of again, because as you're not making a Grenache at the moment, be interesting to see your take on. Let's start with perhaps Australian Grenache as a style. Of course, there should be no such thing as Australian Grenache as a global style, but perhaps the styles in which we tend to see come out of Australia, let's say, compared to Rory's Grenache, which is a far cry from something that might win a trophy in the South Australia show.
Yeah, I'll be honest, Elliot. I only drink Pinot wines from the Yarra Valley, really. So
I can't afford to drink anything else. No. You answered your own question. It was
the leading question, wasn't it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, correct. So far removed from what you get from the rest of Oz, and that my favourite map is looking at a map of Europe's wine growing regions and then superimposing onto a map of Australia and someone saying this is an Australian style of wine. It's just amazing. But in all honesty, that South Australian thing, like you said, ink rich, full, generally blended away into those GSM blends that you see. There's not, I might be dead wrong, that I've not seen a hell of a lot of single site or single varietal Grenaches coming out of any of there, and definitely not in the Yarra. There's maybe 2 vineyards out here that produce Grenache, and we were lucky enough for a couple of years to get some. And I just think grown in a cooler regions and made with, this is my personal opinion, made with a bit more finesse, they're just amazing wines. And Rory's, I reckon I drank most of the tasting stock of the last couple of ABS tastings anyway, and cruising around. There was no spitting going on. It was just smashing into Grenache.
It's 9:30 in this morning, and I'm actually struggling to spit it out, to be honest. It's this fantastic sort of crunchy cherry. I think this is. I love the tasting note of crunchy, especially when it comes to this style of wine with that very taut-skinned cherry pomegranate style with that extra hint of that coffee smoke as well, which I really like as well. It's certainly
you need your beanie on when you're talking about those sorts of notes, mate.
We're going to keep the beanie on. It's very cold here, lads. Remember, it's snowing still outside. No, so I think. Rather than the sort of the over stewy figgy style of Grenache, I think, and actually going back to going back to that iterative process, Europe has had 2,000 plus years of which grape varieties fit best within each region. Australia perhaps has only had 130 years. And therefore, that's only 2 or 3 winemakers worth of iterative process to work out which grape varieties are planted where. added to the fact that, like it or not, things are getting a little warmer, 2 or 3 degrees. As you say, Roy struggled to ripen Grenache before. And now on these sort of marginal climates, we know the grape varieties do so well on their margins. And therefore, it's nice to see this style of Grenache. And as you say, calling it a Grampians Pinot, I think hopefully everyone will understand that is that light skin, light color, nice tart acidity, that crunchy pomegranate fruit.
So good midweight though, it's got a really good texture on midweight. Like a lot of stuff that's got crunchy acidity seems to lack that body. So I think that's pretty cool.
It is the volume and the intensity of fruit weight is there, but the crunchy acidity that keeps that palate clean. It's another one of those wines that just evaporates and disappears from your glass very quickly because you go back looking for the next tasting note. So coming back to, I think, and it ties quite nicely into the healthy fruit. Alcohol content's 13%, Dominique. So 13%. So not huge either. I think if you think of something coming out of South Australia, going to be pushing 14.5, 15. This at 13 sits perfect. And of course, balance is what we're talking about. So I don't mind having wines that are 14.5 as long as it's balanced, but the fact that it's a couple of points lower is also a nice addition. So going back to the healthy fruit, next question ties in is what is the intervention that you least want to make in your winery? As in, what is and I think the way that in which intervention will move towards is a full transparency of additions or subtractions, let's say, what maybe including trying to correct for smoke taint, unfortunately. What would be your absolute fear that the fruit comes in, you've got to make this addition, you've got to make this intervention? Rory, anything that you'd hate to see in the winery?
I'd hate to see a reverse osmosis machine in the winery, because that would mean that you've got something that you've got to get rid of. That's it. That's already in there. So that means you've probably made a mistake. I mean, look, that's a kind of glib answer, but probably the other one that's kind of like that is filtration for reds.
Sure.
I only ever filter reds if they're bacterially unstable. Again, that's because there's been a mistake of some sort. Like, you've got one dodgy barrel that's had some Brettanomyces or something like that, and they're always like 95% of our reds would be unfiltered because we can get them through totally clean, and that's great. So I'd prefer not to filter if I didn't have to. That's probably the big one.
I suppose, Elliot, for us, I'll probably break it down into two areas. You've got your maturation and your finishing. But initially, like if you're gonna get it, if a bushfire comes through, it is what it is. It's part of the vintage. That's our kind of attitude. So we're not going to sit there and take out smoke taint. We're going to leave it in there because that was the year to some degree. And then maturation wise for us, one thing we hate using is sulfur during maturation. It's kind of like pressing pause on the way a wine develops. So wines develop through oxygen, and it's mostly oxygen that helps them mature. And as soon as you add sulfur, it's like stopping that change in so many areas. So that's one thing we avoid during maturation and with some wines even into bottle. And then at the end, it's the same as Rory. Like filtration is kind of avoided as much as possible. I suppose we like to say, like if you filter a wine, it's kind of like the difference between seeing a band live and listening to it produced on Spotify.
Yeah,
I nearly said CD.
Reducing the bandwidth, essentially.
That's it. Or it's like it's like pushing a steak through a colander, and you've got the juice, or you could eat a steak. Like it's that to the extreme.
Yeah, sure. It's Roy, just quick question: what approximate altitude are your vineyard, or is the Grenache vineyards in the Grampians? How high are we talking?
Yeah, so it's 200. That vineyard's 280 meters above sea level.
Nice.
Most of the vineyards in that region are between 220 and 3. Like the highest ones would be sort of 380. Yeah, that's a lower lying site, about 280, and then our Syrahs are mainly up at kind of 350-ish. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Should we move on to the Sangiovese chaps? So we've now moved on to Payten and Jones Valley Vigneron again. So the Valley Vigneron series Sangiovese.
I want to stick with the Grenache personally. That
we can't say that. We've got to give every variety a chance here.
I'm just enjoying the Grenache, but there's the Sangio.
Yeah, very good. So what is it? Let's start with Ben. Is there much Sangiovese planted in the Yarra? How was Pete was he on board with planting Sangiovese or cultivating Sangiovese? How did it all come about?
Yeah, there's not much, if any, Sangiovese. I think there's 3 vineyards maybe, and Dad looks after 2 of them. And he actually forced us to take this fruit off this vineyard. We were dead against Sangiovese. We were like,
first year, who's going to buy Yarra Sangiovese?
Didn't even know how to say the name. And then, but yeah, we started making it, and like in the vineyard, this variety actually, Rory talked about Grenache responding well in the Grampians, and this variety in the 2 vineyards where it's at, it actually responds. I've never seen a grape respond so well in the Yarra in particular. Like, you just don't have to do anything. It just comes in at the right every year, right flavour, at the right sugar level. Like for me, 13% is the magic number. 13 is the magic number. And weirdly, but we pick on flavour, and we pick on tannin flavour and tannin ripeness, and everything just works every year. It doesn't matter what it throws at us. And Dad's got the 2 vineyards just dialed, so he knows. You kind of know what roughly to expect with El Nino and La Nina patterns, weather-wise. So yeah, he dials it in from the start. You know how to manipulate the canopy, exposing fruit or leaving more leaf on, etc. And cropping levels, like dropping fruit midway through the growing season, etc. So yeah, it's amazing. It's really good, and comes into the vineyard, comes into the winery, and as we were saying, like, we literally do not have to do a thing to it. So, and yeah, for me, it's
yeah. Really when we started, it was one of those ones. Seriously, we're like, who the hell's going to buy this? And we did small amounts. It's now behind the VV Pinot that you take as well. It's now the second biggest seller that we sell domestically and for export as well. It's people just love it because it's also the way the fruit's fantastic, but the way it's made, it's just fresh and bright and so different to Sangiovese that you get from the old world. And I think you, Elliot, pulled it in, I think 3 years ago or 4 years ago, when you said, it's a great gateway drug. It's a great gateway into the old world. It's not old world at all. And it goes back to what Ben was saying at the very start of the Zoom meeting, is we're not trying to emulate anything from the old world.
But you can't put this up your nose. That's or smoke it.
Oh, yeah, we could try things, but
I think that's way past gateway standards. So like it's.
But for me, in the morning in the UK.
And we haven't had a second or third vermouth, so I'm afraid. So for me, it's your Sangiovese it's the balance of bright fruit and that savoury note as well. That slightly bacon frazzle, that really sort of savoury umami as well. So the balance between the two is what makes it so special for me. partnered with these fantastic dusty chocolate tannins that are just, as you say, that ripeness of tannin structure is fantastic. It's what makes it, for me, one of my favorite wines. Rory, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, it's I think I love the mid-weight nature of it, and I love the fact that the extraction's not forced on it. It's a really unforced, nice flow to it. I think a lot of Sangiovese, while it's a savoury variety, but oftentimes people try and push the tannin on it a lot and make it and kind of string it out and make it kind of sinewy, whereas this has got plumpness and juiciness to it, and that's just super appealing. It just makes you want to drink more of it.
Yeah, I think flow is such a good word to explain the way it sort of dances ethereally through the palate. It's flow, a really nice way to describe its texture. So Ben, another question from Sarah is, do we think we'll see many more Mediterranean varieties being planted in the Yarra with those varieties looking for this softness of tannin, perhaps more Cabernet?
Yeah, I'm not. I'll give you a tip. I don't think Cabernet will ever get planted again in the valley. I think the valley is so large that people are now much more aware of the microclimates within the valley. So predominantly a lot of Pinot is still getting planted, but in the cold areas, higher areas, there's a lot of Gamay going in the warmer sites, to be honest. And a little bit of Grenache, and Sangiovese, but so that's kind of what's going on at the moment, and Chardonnay.
Surely the Gamay is just pandering to the natural wine crowd in Melbourne.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty much.
Oh, nice.
Well, we'll drink it.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. Another one of my favourite varieties. So should we, last but certainly not least, another wines that got smashed on delivery, unfortunately, is the Story Wines Grampian Shiraz or Syrah. Perhaps, Roy, start off with calling it Syrah, Shiraz. 1, does it matter? 2, is it conscious? 3, is it indicative of the style?
Yes and no to all. It's kind of, it's not overtly a stylistic thing, because I'm not trying to paint it as being like different from South Australian Shiraz, or say that it's different from the idea of what Australian Shiraz is internationally. I think I call it Syrah mainly because that's the international name for the variety, and hopefully one day it is sold in every country in the world.
Sure. So talk us through a little bit about the style that you're looking for. And I don't have it, but again, it's one of those wines that sticks in my mind. It's one of your tasting note with this olive tapenade is really, and that's so typical for me of when tasting Shiraz Syrah from the Grampians, this olive tapenade richness to it, which is both herbaceous and juicy and intense at the same time.
Yeah, so stylistically, I guess I've moved. You talked about pendulum swings in Chardonnay a little bit earlier, and I've gone. I think in my career, I've kind of gone to the far extreme of 100% whole cluster, like super bunchy, really herbaceous Syrah, and that can be good, can be great sometimes, and I still use that technique a lot, but I think probably 17 is a year where I started to back that off a bit and try to get a bit closer to try and represent the skin tannin a bit more than just stalk tannin. Like use stalks to get freshness and to get aromatics and to get a lightness into the wines, and avoid them being stewy and heavy. But I think we backed off on the stalks to about 20 to 30% in this wine, whereas we were kind of up 60, 70 plus a little bit previous to this. And I did that because 17 was a cooler year, and it didn't need any help being herbaceous and light. It needed help having, I guess, having weight and enough genuine fruit structure to age. So I want to walk a line between wines that have got the ability to age and wines that are good for drinking now. And I think that's the style I'm kind of trying to hit. And so kind of like straddling the fence a bit, but these wines age perfectly well for 10 years plus, but they drink really well as young wines. So
yeah, I think so that whole bunch notion, does it change much year on year, or I guess if you're settling into the style that you want to make still, it's both it changes by year and then to try and hone the style as well. So would you say there's two moving variables at the moment still, or do you think you found the style that you want to make forever?
No, I haven't. It'll evolve as I evolve, and people change and your tastes change, and no doubt the wines will change subtly over time. But I guess if I was going to put a really rough rule of thumb on it, the hot years we use more stems to try and get more lightness and freshness into the wines, and the cooler years we use less. But it typically kind of hovers between 20 and 50% these days, depending on whether it's a cool year or a hot year. And then depending on what the fruit looks like in the vineyard too. Like if the stalks, like you taste the stalks too, and if they taste ripe, you use more. If they taste super green and a bit gross, you just want to leave them out.
Yeah. Cool. Bruce, I hope that answers your question. I was trying to sort of move it into the whole lot, which is the whole, what does the whole bunch fermentation add? But quickly before I get Troy, Ben and Troy, your opinion on it. We've got a question also is, how do you adjust for El Nino and what do you do in the vineyards year on year, and how often, I guess the question is can you see what's coming based on cyclical patterns?
Well, we all know how well people can predict the weather, but now that we are given an idea, we're given an idea quite kind of regularly about roughly, how warm the sea temp is in the Pacific in various locations, and then how that can kind of affect rainfall patterns and heat patterns. And then you've got the Indian Ocean influence, and then you've got the monsoon influence coming down from the tropics, from India and Indo. And so you are kind of given a rough idea about whether it's going to be dry, whether it's going to be hot and dry, whether it's going to be hot and wet, or mild and wet, or just mild. So you are given a rough framework to kind of plan the growing season with, but
what's thrown at you is going to be totally
it changes. You have to just adjust in the vineyard on weekly, daily, dependent. But it is good to get an idea, so you are, somewhat prepared going in. But it's never accurate. But you do know when it's hot and dry, they usually get that right, and when it's mild and wet, they usually get that right. So you can adjust the way you grow it, and therefore the way it's going to be made and the way it's going to taste accordingly. Yeah.
So coming back to Rory Syrah, is you've dabbled, of course, a little bit with a whole bunch fermentation yourself in Syrah, but I guess the material that you're working with from the Grampians compared to the Yarra is completely different. It'd be lovely to hear your take on how it differs and sort of telling the difference perhaps between your two styles of fruit material and therefore what ends up in your glass.
You want me to go first?
No, I was going to go for Troy and Ben, because
I wasn't listening.
Sorry.
What?
I was going to say Troy.
Nose.
Troy and Ben have worked also with a lot of whole bunch ferment with some of your Syrahs as well. But the fruit material you're working with is a little bit different to the fruit material that Rory's working with. So how would you say the two Syrahs would compare whole bunch in the Yarra to whole bunch in the Grampians?
Yeah, I think in the Yarra because it is obviously a different climatic kind of situation. So we'd probably use whole bunch slightly different to the way Rory was saying, and
Sure.
So I think this to me is more a subtle kind of whole bunch characteristics. So he's used So what he was saying before about like using whole bunch for lightness, with the warmer years is kind of the direct opposite of what we kind of do to some degree.
Sure.
I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
So you say you're still using whole bunch in the cooler years as well to really accentuate that florality, herbaceousness, and
Yeah. I mean, you can get that kind of carbonic red cherry from a whole bunch,
well.
And at the same time, depending on how long you leave the ferment and at what stage you pick the grapes, then you can bring in influences of tannin and aromatics from the bunch as well. So we'll kind of use that side of things, but we will also, as Rory does, kind of change the percentage
year on year. Yeah.
With year on year. Yeah.
It comes right back to the beginning of our conversation of getting that direct feedback loop from avant-garde restaurants in Melbourne, I guess, as well.
But you also remember the first year you with it was 2014 that we used to do was that 100% whole bunch. And it was a punch in the face. Yeah. Me and you loved it, and there was 35 people in the room going, "What the fuck are these guys doing? Like, this is insane." And then that's when we discussed, and it was like, okay, maybe 2015 we'll look at doing that 50-50 between whole bunches and whole berries, and that changed the whole everything that we were doing with what we're doing with our Syrah. And then that sort of evolved, through that thing, warmer and cooler sort of years. And it's more about having that richness and stuff, but also that perfume that those whole berries sort of brought in. And I think it's indicative of the year of the way you want to do it. But it's I don't think it's a set formula, as Rory said. Like one year if it's a bit warmer, you do a bit more, and a bit cooler, you do a bit less.
Sure.
But Ben said different again. For the regions, it's such a big area when you're looking at Victoria. And
with this Syrah, that the bunchiness adds just layers and dimensions that would never have been there if you had a kind of just do that. Made it more compelling.
The complexity that it adds is again, it keeps you wanting to go back for another sip to try and find what that new addition, that new aroma is that you missed.
Which is all that matters, isn't it?
Exactly.
All it is about, do you like it or do you not like it? Is it delicious? Great.
Is it delicious?
Put it in the. You'd have to do online sales now, so put it in the cart.
Yeah, exactly. Rory, anything else to add before we move on from the Syrah? Take a few questions before we wrap things up.
Yeah, I mean, the Syrah it's the mainstay of our region. The Grampians is 80% planted to Syrah, and that's why I wanted to make wine from that region, because I loved Grampian Syrah, and there were some great producers out there. Not many in total producers, but some really notable ones like Mount Lange-Giran and Best's, and to a certain extent Seppelt's, who were making awesome wines out there in the 90s and early 2000s that were totally different from what was coming out of what was perceived to be mainstream Australian Syrah or Shiraz. So that's why I went there. And I just think the region's great for that grape variety, particularly in the cooler sites. And the warm ones, you plant Grenache.
Very good. Well, chaps, thank you so much for chatting. I think we'll just stick around for 5 minutes or so if anyone's got any questions. Everyone, thank you so much for joining. It's been really, and thanks again for joining so late. And any Australia Day plans, chaps, before we head off?
Mate, I've got 4 kids, 6 and under. My wife is wrestling them at the moment. As I walked out, I just heard something smash, and I closed the door just quickly and went, I'll be back in a few hours. So I reckon there's a bit of paperwork to be done tonight.
Yeah, very good. From the winery.
Correct. Not from home.
No. And I'm sorry, one more thing is Matthew Harrow is asking about key kegs. Is that something you're seeing popping up in Melbourne as well? And are you filling key kegs with any of your wines, perhaps the Valley Vignon series or Rory Grampians Grenache Grampian Shiraz or the entry Shiraz? Something you'd look at?
Yes, I do it already. We keg up some Syrah and sell it in a few pubs and venues around Melbourne when they don't have coronavirus.
Yes.
So yeah, we already do it. It's great.
Fantastic. Well, we'll have to look at bringing some over for Matthew then on the next shipment. Are you doing as well?
We were doing bladders of like 200 litres bladders as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Up in Byron.
Byron Bay.
Yeah. So
nice.
But it's hard. Yeah. The government changed all the taxation rules, so it's not as easy as it was 2 years ago. Anyway.
We have a question from Bruce. He's asking about the Mourvedre, but I think he means Same
thing.
Yeah,
Same thing if you're Spanish or you're French. Same thing.
Perfect. So give us a bit of a rundown on the Mataro, the Mourvedre.
8 months on skins, much more lighter style, full whole berry kind of carbonic ferment initially, and we just let it rest. Locked up in a VC tank, drained it through skins. The skins are still in the tank at the moment. We haven't had time to empty it. And I think a Serbian guy's going to do something with them. But anyway,
and also sometimes with the skins we give them to a local brewer in Melbourne, and he makes some wacky, crazy beers. He makes wonderful beers, but as Ben pointed out, I think he wants to be a winemaker because
all of his beers are made with grape skins,
and they taste like wine. He's a bloody legend, and the brand's awesome. Three Ravens, but it's he's chittering on the point there. But it's also the label this year was a bit of not a joke, but it's a bit of personal stuff, but also a bit of fun to be taken with it. But also the juice inside's really good, so we'll do it again next year, and hopefully we won't have to do a fuck 2021. Yeah, hopefully.
I was just about to say, what's it going to be called? It all depends on what happens. I think in Australia it might be fine, but if for the English label, we might have to keep it that way as well.
Mate, we'll send you 6 pallets just for that. Then easy, done.
But it's a lighter style. Mourvedre or Mataro, whatever. And it's got a really interesting tannin profile from the 8 months on skins. With no sulfur, so they have had time to evolve and change. It's got like a bit of sour cherry, but some oxidative, kind of cool oxidative notes.
And annoyingly, there's just not going to be enough for me to have any. Which is
you've taken the whole allocation anyway, so it's all right.
Brilliant. Lads, thank you so much for joining. For anyone who's watching, I'm going to be ducking into the Zoom room that is also, there's a link on the event page that I'm going to be available to chat this morning. So if anyone wants to chat through any of our wines, more than happy to continue a conversation. And this will be available to watch back on YouTube and our website later. But guys, thank you so much for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, brother. Thank you. Cheers, Rory, man.
Cheers,
sorry,
guys.
Boys. Good to catch up.
Sorry not sharing a warm lager and a pack of stale chips on the train, but hopefully next year.
Brilliant.
I
Cheers, guys.
To it.
Bye.